The bell above the door of Tony's bakery didn't just jingle, it screamed in protest as it was shoved open. One moment, Gia was dusting flour from her hands, the warm, sweet air of the bakery a familiar comfort. The next, the warmth was sucked out, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. 3 men in dark suits filled the small space. And in the center was him. He moved with a quiet power that made the air feel thick. He wasn't tall, but he seemed to take up all the room. His name was Rocco, and his eyes, dark and sharp as broken glass, swept past the cannoli and focaccia, landing on Gia's Uncle Tony, who had frozen behind the counter, his face the color of stale bread. "Tony," Rocco's voice was low, a rumble of distant thunder. "The money. It's time." "Rocco, please," Tony whispered, his hands shaking so hard he had to grip the counter. "I don't have it. Business is bad. Just a few more days." One of Rocco's men took a step forward, but Gia was faster. She moved in front of her uncle, planting her flour-dusted apron between him and the danger. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she lifted her chin. "You can't just come in here and scare him," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Rocco's gaze shifted to her. He looked amused and maybe a little impressed. He studied her, the defiant set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, as if she were a curious painting. "And you are?" "His niece, Gia." A slow smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Brave girl." He looked back at Tony, who was shrinking away. "A brave girl for a cowardly man. This is a shame." He nodded to his man, who started to move around the counter. "Wait!" Gia cried out, not moving an inch. "Take me." The room went utterly still. Even Rocco's men looked surprised. "What?" Tony gasped. "You need someone to work off the debt, right?" Gia said, the idea forming as she spoke. "I can work. I'm strong. I'll do anything, filing, cleaning, whatever you need. For 1 month. But you have to promise, right now, that my uncle is safe. The debt is gone, and no one ever bothers him again. Forever." Rocco was silent for a long, terrifying moment. He looked from Tony's terrified face to Gia's determined one. A strange light flickered in his dark eyes. It wasn't cruelty. It was calculation. "A life for a debt," he murmured, almost to himself. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine. The old man is safe. The debt is cleared. But you come with me. You work for me for 1 month. No arguments." Gia's breath hitched. She turned and hugged her sobbing uncle. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's going to be okay." She wasn't sure if she believed it. She expected to be taken to a scary office building with metal desks and tough guys. Instead, the black car drove them out of the city and up a winding hill to a huge, beautiful house hidden behind tall gates and trees. It wasn't a fortress, it was a mansion, quiet and lonely. He led her inside to a bedroom that was bigger than her whole apartment. It had a soft bed, a big window, and its own bathroom. "This is your room," Rocco said. "Where's the office?" "The files," Gia asked, confused. "We'll talk about work tomorrow," he said, and then he left, closing the door behind him. She heard a quiet but definite click. She was a guest, but she was also a prisoner. The next few days were strange. No one gave her chores. Meals were brought to her room on a silver tray. Rocco started joining her for dinner in the small dining room. The first time, they ate in silence. The second time, he asked about the bakery. On the third night, she found him looking at the bookshelf in her room. "You read these?" he asked, his fingers tracing the spine of an old leather-bound book. "Some," she said cautiously. "Most people don't like old poetry," he said, pulling out a book of Robert Frost. He seemed different here, softer. The scary boss was gone, replaced by a man who looked tired. He told her how his father built this business, but all he ever wanted was to be a history teacher. Gia saw the loneliness in him, a deep well of it, and she felt a dangerous pull of sympathy. She had to remind herself that he was a criminal who had taken her from her home. One afternoon, bored and restless, she pulled a thick, dusty book about ancient Rome from the shelf. As she opened it, a folded piece of paper fluttered out. Curious, she picked it up. It was a letter. The handwriting was messy and sharp. "Tony," it began. Her blood ran cold. The information was good. "Rocco's shipment on the 4th was intercepted, just as you said. You have my thanks. Keep your eyes open. When the time is right, we will move against him for good. Your reward will be great." It was signed by a man named Vinny, the Viper, Salerno. Everyone knew he was Rocco's biggest enemy. Her uncle. Her kind, helpless Uncle Tony was a traitor. He had sold information to Rocco's rival. The debt was probably just an excuse. Rage, hot and bitter, filled Gia's mouth. This was all a game, and she was the pawn. Rocco knew. She had to know. He took her to get back at Tony. She didn't wait for dinner. She stormed out of her room, the letter clutched in her fist, and found Rocco in his study. She slammed the paper down on his desk. "You knew," she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "You knew my uncle was working for Vinny. Was this your plan all along? Take me to hurt him? To lure him here?" Rocco's face went from surprise to grim as he read the letter. He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw real emotion in his eyes. Not anger, but a shocking weariness. "I knew Tony was a snake," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I found out last week. Then why take me? Why not just deal with him?" "Because, Gia," he said, stepping closer, his intense eyes locking with hers. "If I knew, then Vinny knows that I know. Tony is a dead man walking, and you," he paused, his voice dropping. "You are his weakness. And now you are a target. Vinny would have grabbed you off the street to get to Tony, or just to send me a message. I didn't take you for the money. I took you to protect you. This house is the only safe place left." Gia stared at him, her mind reeling. It wasn't a punishment. It was a rescue. The comfortable room, the kind talks, was it all real? Before she could form a single thought, the world exploded. Boom. The sound was deafening. The whole house shook. An alarm blared to life. Shouts and the popping sound of gunfire echoed from the front gates. Rocco's head snapped toward the noise. He ran to the window and cursed. "They're here. Already." He turned back to her, his face a mask of fierce determination. He yanked open a drawer in his desk, pulled out a heavy, black pistol, and shoved it into her hands. It was cold and terrifyingly heavy. What do I do?" she stammered. "You run," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. He looked her straight in the eye, his expression desperate. "There's a path through the woods behind the house. Don't stop for anyone. Trust no one." He pushed her toward the back door. "Not even me. Run." The cold, heavy gun felt like a betrayal in Gia's hand. Rocco's command echoed in her head as another explosion rocked the mansion, raining dust from the ceiling. He was already turning away from her, ready to fight a hopeless battle to give her time. But Gia didn't run. Her mind, sharp with fear, replayed the long, boring hours she'd spent exploring her gilded cage. She remembered a loose panel at the back of a storage closet, a dark, damp smell, and a set of stairs leading down. "This way," she yelled, her voice cutting through the noise. She grabbed Rocco's arm, pulling him with a strength she didn't know she had. He resisted for a split second, shock on his face, before letting her lead him. They stumbled through the chaotic hallway, dodging his men who were firing from windows. She yanked open the closet door, shoved aside brooms and buckets, and pressed on the panel. It swung inward, revealing darkness. "Where does this go?" Rocco demanded, following her into the narrow, stone passage. "I don't know," she admitted, pulling the panel shut behind them. "But it's away from here." They moved in pitch black, feeling their way along the cold, slimy wall. The sounds of the battle became muffled, then faded completely. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a sliver of moonlight. The tunnel ended in a heavy metal grate hidden behind thick ivy at the bottom of the hill, far from the mansion's gates. They emerged into the cold night air, gulping it down. But as Rocco took a step, he grunted in pain and stumbled, clutching his side. His white shirt was stained a deep, spreading red. A piece of shrapnel had caught him. "You're hurt," Gia cried. "It's nothing," he gritted out, but his face was pale. She helped him to an old, abandoned gardener's shed she'd seen on her walks. It was filled with rusty tools and smelled of dirt, but it was shelter. In the dim light, she made him sit and ripped his shirt aside. The wound was deep and ugly. Her hands trembled, but she remembered her first aid training from the bakery. Using torn strips from her own shirt and clean water from an old bottle, she cleaned the cut as best she could, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Rocco watched her, his dark eyes filled with a pain that wasn't just physical. "You should have run," he whispered, his voice rough. "And let you die after you just saved me?" she replied, not looking up from her work. "That's not how I work." Her fingers were gentle on his skin. The shed was silent except for their breathing. The world had shrunk to just this small, dark space. The danger outside, the betrayals, it all melted away. He reached up, his hand, usually so sure and commanding, now trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. She froze, looking into his eyes. She saw the lonely man who loved poetry, the fierce protector, the wounded warrior. All of him. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was not sweet, but desperate and real. It was a kiss born from fear, from relief, from a connection that had sparked in a bakery and caught fire in the ruins of his home. It was a promise and a question, all at once. The next morning, they huddled around a small, battery-powered radio they'd found. They were hoping for news about the attack, but they got something much, much worse. In organized crime news, the power struggle following last night's attack on Rocco Marino's estate has taken a shocking turn. Sources confirm that Vinny, the Viper, Salerno was found dead this morning. Taking control of his entire operation is a man previously considered a minor player, Tony Ricci. Gia felt the world drop out from under her. The reporter's voice kept talking, but she couldn't hear it. Her kind, helpless uncle. The traitor. The new boss. He hadn't been a victim. He had used the chaos, used her, to seize power for himself. Rocco clicked the radio off. The silence in the shed was heavy. "He played us all," Rocco said quietly. "He played you." Tears of anger and hurt welled in Gia's eyes, but she wiped them away fiercely. A new, cold strength settled inside her. He played the wrong person. They were now allies, bound by a common enemy. For days, they hid, planning. Rocco couldn't trust any of his old contacts. They were two people against an empire. In their hideout, they shared pieces of themselves. Rocco told her about his dream of leaving it all behind, of owning a quiet bookstore by the sea. "I saw you in that bakery," he admitted one night, his voice soft. "You weren't scared. You were a light in my dark world. I just wanted to be near it." Gia's heart ached for him. She saw the good man buried under the bad deeds. They learned the annual feast of San Gennaro was coming up. A huge, crowded street festival in the city. Tony, the new proud boss, would have to be there, to show his face and his power. It was the perfect place for a confrontation. Their plan was risky: get close, use the crowd, and force him to confess everything where people could hear. The night of the feast, the streets were a river of light, music, and people. Smells of sausage and sweets filled the air. Gia's hand was tight in Rocco's as they moved through the crowd, heading for the main stage where Tony would be holding court. They ducked into a narrow, quiet alley to catch their breath and make their final move. Rocco turned to her, his face set. "Ready?" Before she could answer, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Sal, Rocco's most trusted bodyguard, the man who had been at his side for a decade. He was supposed to be gathering loyal men miles away. "Boss," Sal said, a sad smile on his face. "I'm glad you're alive." Then he raised a gun, pointing it straight at Rocco's chest. "But my loyalty was bought a long time ago. Tony pays better." The betrayal was a physical blow. Rocco stared, utterly stunned. Sal forced them at gunpoint into the back of a waiting van, which drove them to a deserted warehouse. Tony was there, dressed in an expensive new suit, a triumphant smirk on his face. "My favorite niece and the fallen king," he greeted them, spreading his arms wide. "Look at this happy family reunion." "Why, Uncle?" Gia asked, her voice cracking with a hurt she no longer felt. I loved you. Love is for fools, Gia, Tony said, his voice cold and smooth as ice. I took you in after your parents died for one reason. You were pretty and brave. I knew you'd be useful one day. A perfect pawn to distract a powerful man. And you were. He waved a hand at Rocco. You played your part perfectly. Gia listened, letting his words wash over her. The last bit of love she had for him turned to ash, and in its place was a cool, clear certainty. As Tony monologued, bragging about his cleverness, Gia slowly, carefully, moved her hand behind her back. She made a small, circular motion with her finger, the signal she and Rocco had agreed upon in the shed. Now. Rocco, who had been playing the part of the defeated captive, exploded into motion. He slammed his shoulder into Sal, who was distracted by Tony's speech. The gun clattered to the floor. Fool! Tony roared, pulling out his own weapon. It changes nothing. Suddenly, the warehouse was flooded with blinding blue and red lights. Sirens wailed, and the sound of screeching tires and shouting police officers filled the air. This is the NYPD. We have the building surrounded. Tony and his men froze in confusion. Rocco looked at Gia, a question in his eyes. Gia stood tall, a small, grim smile on her face. I called them, she said, her voice clear and strong in the chaos. The day I found the letter. I didn't know who to trust, so I trusted the law. I made a deal. My testimony for our safety. She had played the final card, the one nobody saw coming. The pawn had checkmated the king. The warehouse doors burst open, and police officers swarmed in. Tony and Sal, their faces masks of shock and fury, were quickly surrounded, handcuffed, and led away. The empire Tony had betrayed everyone to build lasted less than a day. Rocco's own organization was in ruins, his men scattered or arrested. He was free, but he had lost everything he had ever known. In the quiet days that followed, a heavy sadness settled over Rocco. He and Gia stayed in a small, safe apartment, but he was distant. He watched her, the brave girl who had become his savior, and a painful thought took root in his mind. One evening as the sun set, he finally spoke the words that had been haunting him. You should go, Gia, he said, his voice rough. You have your life back. Your uncle is gone. You're safe. You deserve a normal life, a good man, sunshine, not a man like me. I have nothing left to give you. Gia looked at him, not with pity, but with a fierce light in her eyes. You're wrong, she said softly. She walked to a drawer and pulled out an official-looking document. I didn't just call the police, Rocco. I made a deal. My full testimony against Tony and his new gang, in exchange for one thing. A full pardon for you. Your criminal record is being wiped clean. You're not a man with nothing. You're a free man with a fresh start. I traded my past for your future. Rocco took the paper, his hands trembling. He read the legal words, but all he saw was her incredible courage. She hadn't just saved him from prison, she had saved him from himself. He looked at her, truly seeing the woman who had seen a spark of goodness in him and fought to fan it into a flame. You did this for me? I did it for us, she whispered. In that moment, the last of his walls crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He promised her then, with tears in his eyes, that he was done with that life for good. He would spend the rest of his days being the honest man she saw when she looked at him. Weeks later, he took her for a walk. He led her down a familiar street, and Gia's heart leapt into her throat. They stopped in front of Tony's old bakery, but the sign was gone. The windows were clean, and the door was freshly painted. What's this? She asked. Rocco handed her a key. Our new beginning, he said. I used the last of my legal money. It's yours. Our first honest business. A real bakery. It was more than a building. It was a symbol. It was where their story had begun in fear, and where it would now continue in love. Gia threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. This was his promise made real. 1 year later, the bakery, now named Dolce Vita, was a roaring success. The air was once again filled with the warm, sweet smell of baking bread and pastries, but now it was mixed with laughter and joy. Gia and Rocco were married, a perfect team. Rocco, in a simple apron, was happier kneading dough than he had ever been giving orders. He was a respected businessman, known for his fairness and his famous cannoli. On the morning of the grand opening of their second location, Gia had a special surprise. As Rocco was arranging a tray of biscotti, she came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our family is growing," she whispered. Rocco turned, his eyes wide with disbelief, then overflowing with a joy so pure it lit up his whole face. He kissed her, pouring all his love and gratitude into that one kiss. They were building everything they never knew they wanted: a family, a legacy of love. Just as the first customers were arriving, the mail came. Among the congratulatory cards was a plain, white envelope with no return address. The postmark was from a prison. Gia's smile faded as she opened it. Inside, there was no letter. Just a single, faded, black and white photograph of a beautiful, smiling woman. Rocco gasped, taking the photo with shaking hands. It was his mother, who had disappeared when he was a young boy. On the back, in Tony's messy scrawl, were a few final words. "I kept her from you. I told you she ran away. Now we are even. Be happy, niece." It was the last piece of their painful past, delivered from a prison cell. It wasn't an apology, it was a surrender. Tony had held this one final secret, and in letting it go, he gave them both the closure they needed. There were no more ghosts, no more secrets. Just a future, bright and sweet, waiting to be lived. We hope you loved the story of Gia and Rocco. If your heart is still racing from all the twists and turns, do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel for more dramatic love stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought of that wild ending. What was your favorite plot twist? Rate this story from 1 to 10 down below.